Hey everybody, I'm Julianna with Choppin' It Up with Amania.
Hello everybody, Amania here. Good to be with you, the Conservative Poet City Talk podcast.
And I'm with Watchmen Action. So we're really excited to have Elisabeth Sabaditsch-Wolff with us. Just making sure you guys can see her book. And she's got a pretty amazing story to tell. So we're very excited about having you here, Elisabeth. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
I'm excited to be back on your show, Amania. And you, Julianna.
You know, it's been like a year now since we first had our conversation, and I still look at our work that we did together, and your story is just so out of this world, and because of that, you are an advocate for freedom of speech. You're going everywhere, the U.S. You're originally Austrian, and so you're going everywhere to talk about what you've seen, what you've gone through. And so your book, again, amazing. And talk to us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm an Austrian citizen, always was, always will be. And my father was a diplomat. My father actually passed away exactly a year ago. And he was an Austrian. He loved his country, but he also loved representing his country. And my mother, my sister, and I, of course, had to do this with him. So I got to spend a lot of time in different countries, including the United States, where I spent a good part of my kindergarten years, and also in Chicago when I attended some of grade school and some of high school. And it wasn't only the United States. I also got to spend a lot of time in Iran before the revolution, when the Shah was still in power, and also during the revolution. So I got a good sense of what a country looks like before it is turned into a religious beep hole. And I was old enough to see it all. I saw what a country turns into when religious fanatics take over. And what's also so sad about that this revolution in Iran was also greatly driven by women. And that pained me even back then, when as a young child, I couldn't understand what was going on. But later on, I did understand. And it was so driven by women who all of a sudden found it, who before found it okay to walk in the streets with showing their hair, and all of a sudden you had these black clad women screaming Allahu Akbar and death to America and death to the Shah, and that made a huge impression on me. And I would live to tell the tale. It wasn't always that easy in Iran. I know what it's like when you're hungry. I know what it's like when you don't have enough food, when your mom has to cook in secret while the kids are sleeping, because she was cooking, she was preparing meals for the American hostages held in the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, for us children, my sister and me, not to be able to eat the same kind of food that she was preparing for the hostages, that really made a big impression on me. So food isn't all that important to me as long as I have some, but, I'm not usually that complicated about it, and I know its value. I also spent some time, about 6 weeks, or maybe a little less than that, in Iraq during Christmas break, 1982 to 1983. So I got to see what the other side of the war looked like, and what a war economy looks like. And Christmas Eve was spent worshiping together with Iraqi Christians in an Iraqi church. I think it were Chaldean Christians. I don't remember exactly, but I assume that was their denomination. And nowadays it's 2025, and Saddam Hussein is long gone, but so are the Christians in Iraq. And I have a great understanding of why this happened. And while I'm not a big fan, or never was a big fan, of Saddam Hussein, I am a big critic of what happened and what America did, under George Bush, in getting rid of this dictator. No, he was not a good man, but Christian life flourished, Jewish life flourished in Iraq, and now they're all gone. You look at the same thing happening in Libya, where I also lived for a year in the early 2000s. I was actually in Libya on 9/11. Well, my boss, the ambassador, went to Catholic mass every Sunday in a Muslim country with a dictator. Yes, he was brutal, but yes, these dictators are sometimes quote unquote better for the the other religious groups. And again, look at what happened in Syria. That's what I'm also afraid of. You get rid of Assad, and all of a sudden, you have all these Christian groups disappearing. And that's exactly what's happening right now. You have Christian groups either. I'm sorry, Christian groups. Yeah, my cough. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I apologize.
It's okay. That's okay.
So Christian groups fleeing, or maybe even becoming Muslim, just to enable them to survive. And I got this understanding because I grew up in these countries, or I spent time in these countries and working. I didn't just go on vacation, so I really lived there. But I didn't also just live there. I also experienced the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait in 1990 when I was 19 years old. And, people have told me, and you will read about this in the book, that I live a sort of Forrest Gumpian life, that I turn up in places where, history is being made. And, while it's, I can laugh about it right now, and I'm coughing. I did take medicine before we started. So really my deepest apologies to everyone watching today. I hope the cough medicine will kick in. But I was fortunate while, my situation wasn't all that easy. I consider myself very fortunate, not only having survived all of that, but also because I got such a deep understanding of parts of the world that other people just say, well, I was on vacation in Tunisia or in Morocco, and I spent a week here or spent a week there. No, you have no clue what's going on. You got to live it. You have to know.
Right.
You have to live. You have to know what it's like. Right now, we have Ramadan going on. And people have no idea what Ramadan means. People have no clue. They think it's just fasting. No, it's like Islam. Ramadan is a way of life. And even if you're non-Muslim, you will still have to participate in Ramadan, more or less. And you don't really get a choice. You see, you have to participate in Ramadan, or you just don't go out and you don't leave your house. So, this is really something, there's a difference between living in a country or just spending a few days or weeks in a country.
Exactly.
I have.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, to give you a break for a moment. So my husband and I had seen you at Center Right. And I was so impressed with the fact that, for you, you're from another country coming into America going, warning, warning, don't you see what's happening here? Like, I can say warning, warning, but, I'm an American and people are looking at me like, what are you warning about? How do you know that something's really happening? But to hear somebody from another country going, don't you see that what happened over here, and I experienced, I lived it, right? And now I'm seeing it with my own eyes, that you've got a country that's the freest country in the world, supposed to be, right? And now under attack. It's called the Dawa. Am I saying that correctly? Where the the enemy, let's call it that, will slowly integrate into all the facets of government and our life and whatnot to be able to start swaying how we think and what we do and whatnot. Can you talk more about that?
Well, dawa is actually a religious term, and dawa means trying to convince the non-Muslim to become a Muslim. So, for instance, I had a boyfriend in Kuwait, an Egyptian, a very devout Egyptian, and he tried dawa on me, as is his job as a Muslim. But he made a mistake, because you don't tell me, Elisabeth, you got to read this book because it's so fantastic. Because what does Elisabeth do? Of course, she goes and reads it. And of course, she doesn't draw the same conclusions that he wanted me to draw. And the problem was, it became very obvious when we were, in a car. He was driving me back from dinner, driving me back to the embassy where I lived. And all of a sudden, so en passant, he said to me, well, what did you think about the book? And I said, direct that I am sometimes, even though I'm a diplomat's daughter, how can you believe this crap? And that was enough for him to smack me in the car. He smacked me.
Wow.
And that was the end of the relationship.
That's the end of that.
Yeah, well, you don't tell me to read a book, that's a big mistake. It was his mistake. And then, of course, I was lucky in that I didn't pursue it back in Kuwait at the time, because if I had done what I did, back, if you fast forward to 2007, and I start really, really reading up on and, trying to understand what Islam is really about, I would have been in real trouble. They would have expelled me. If I had started asking the questions that I asked about 8 or 9 years later, I really would have gotten, despite my diplomatic status, I would have gotten in a lot of trouble. So, God had a way of preventing me from asking the questions that I would ask later on, asking them where I really wasn't supposed to ask them. And thank God I didn't. I just had this feeling that something was off, that something didn't really add up. And, with all the dawah going on, and it's happening all over the place. Of course, Muslims do what Muslims do. And I'm not blaming the Muslims, with all the dawah going on, with Muslims trying to convince us that their religion is the right religion, the only religion. I'm not blaming Muslims, just as I'm not blaming socialists for being socialists. I'm blaming our people for allowing this to happen. That is where I lay the blame. Okay? It's not the Muslims. Not that I'm thinking, and when I say Muslims, I always talk about devout Muslims who follow Islam to the letter. I'm not talking about Muslims who are Muslims in name only and are, according to Islamic law, actually not Muslims at all, and are, if in an Islamic country would be, their head would be rolling in the streets. And I'm not kidding.
The cultural Muslims.
Exactly. But what I do blame these cultural Muslims for is whenever something bad happens in the name of Islam, that they, do you see any of the big, huge demonstrations in the streets of, I don't know, Vienna, Augsburg, Mannheim, any of those, or maybe Paris, or, those towns that are really suffering from all the vehicular jihad that's going on? So I do blame those cultural Muslims too, because they could say not in my name, but they're not doing that because they're afraid they're also going to be executed by those devout Muslims out there who really believe fervently in their religion, as they should. Again, I'm not blaming them. They're doing what they're supposed to do. What's not happening is, and I do blame the West and our countries, is that we are not willing and able to defend Western civilization and all that is good about Western civilization. That is what I really do blame. Look at Europe. Europe has no religious affiliation. We are a godless society, and godless societies tend to believe in everything and nothing. And in that void is where, Islam is just able to make inroads. And that's where the dawah is so successful. And, I was I was I usually lurk on Instagram when I have the time. And I got a lot of these American women, profiles into my timeline. They just showed up, a lot of them. And those are beautiful American women. I mean, gorgeous American women who all of a sudden think, yeah, because of October 6th and the poor Palestinians, they have to convert to Islam to help these poor Palestinians. And of course, these women are a problem too, a huge problem, because they don't understand what Islam is really about, because it's easy to be a Muslim in a non-Muslim country. I really would like these beautiful American women. I mean, again, gorgeous women, beautiful. I mean, one of the women is a Black woman who used to be a hair model. Can you imagine a beautiful Afro-American woman, hair model? So you know how gorgeous her hair. I mean, she was wearing hair like this, gorgeous. Oh. Now it's all covered by Amania.
Wow.
It just breaks my heart. But they're in America. It's easy to be a Muslim in America. How about you go to Afghanistan? How about you go to Gaza? If you're so into all of that, why don't you go there? Grab a few tons of I don't know, food and drink and other medical supply and medical supplies, and then let's see how you fare, how easy you think it is to be a Muslim in these countries. So there's a lot of people to blame for the situation that we're in, but most of all, I think it's really us that we need to blame. We need to find God again as a society. The true God, not the God of the Islamic faith. And as long as we don't do that, I think we're going to be lost even more. Yeah. So that hopefully answers your question about dawah.
Thank you, Elisabeth. And I would like to ask, continuing with the same thing, but gonna throw Christianity in there. Why do you believe that? If you believe it, what's your point of view? Why are Western governments so eager to suppress criticism of Islam or this kind of, they tolerate that? Why is that the attacks that we see on Christianity, the attacks that we see, why is it that the Western governments are quick to, bypass these Islamic, thoughts and ways and so on when it comes to this?
It's a good question. I think a lot of it is fear, because they know what happens. A lot of it is fear and submission. It's easier to submit than to study Islam. It's a lot more work. It took me a few years to figure out what was going on. I studied it. I know what it's like. And I studied the tenets. But it's easier for someone to say, oh, that's not in Islam. You're just a hate monger, an Islamophobe, whatever. But if you don't do your due diligence, it's easy for you to say. But of course, I've read the Quran. I read the Quran in many different translations. Of course, not in the original Arabic, because I don't speak Arabic. But I have, there are numerous translations out there, English translations as well as German translations. So I get the gist of what the Quran is trying to say. I even have a Quran at home that is given out to new Muslims, trying to convince them to become Muslims. And of course, that is written completely different. It's a different language, because all the passages calling for the murder, the execution of non-Muslims are, of course, worded differently, because Islam itself is not pretty. It's not very comforting at first. It might be at first comforting when you look at the Quran translation that is handed out to non-Muslims to make them feel welcome. But when you read the Quran translations or the original Quran, as I have been told by numerous Coptic Christians who speak Arabic and can read Arabic, that the real Quran is so much more violent towards non-Muslims than we would ever imagine. So, returning to your questions, why are they suppressing it? Because it's ugly, and you don't want to have to deal with ugly things that are violent, things where you would have to act on. Because if Western politicians knew what was in the Quran, there is no real reason in good faith for these politicians not to ban the practice of Islam. And that's what's hard, because how do you deal with that on a legislative level? That is trying to square a circle.
Right.
I also don't have an answer. I disagree. I disagree with Geert Wilders. Okay, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands has always called for the banning of the Quran. I totally disagree. We should not ban the Quran. We should read it.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Julianna.
Wow. Everything that you just said is just so like, how do you even start having a conversation about that? And, as a country, now remember, once upon a time, they said no Muslims were allowed in America, right? When we only had like 13 colonies is when we were baby America, right? We weren't allowed to have any Catholics here either. Yep. Right. So our original forefathers were like, okay, so this sect of people, right? The Muslims, they were the pirates. They were the ones that out there coming after our ships and whatnot. Like it was the first, encounter that we had. And the reason why we had to have the Navy be built was because we were being invaded by Muslims. But most people have no idea about that. We're talking about legislating.
That's the thing. You got to know your history. If you don't know your history, you don't know what's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's why with Watchmen Action, everything my husband and I are doing, it's like part of our workbook literally is you have to take a topic and then do the historical background on it. Like you need to understand why you're fighting for what you're fighting for. You need to understand that. But yet we've been told that we're a multicultural, country, right? That's not how we were founded. Our original politicians all had to take an oath. And it was like, if they were Protestant, I swear to Jesus Christ and all this other stuff. Like they literally had to say, right. And today, forget it. You can, be sworn in on the Quran.
Today is anything goes. And if you don't subscribe to the anything goes, you're a bigot, you're Islamophobe, you're a right-wing extremist, whatever, the list is long. But the thing is, anything goes means where do you draw the line? Pedophilia. Is pedophilia all of a sudden okay and anything goes?
It sounds
look at the mutilation of children. If we have an anything goes, and you got to respect everything and everyone, where do you draw the line? And that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I think right now what we're seeing is that anything goes, like you say. When we see what's happening with children, when we see what's happening with the mutilation of them, when we see all of these things, if laws aren't being followed, I mean, we're literally destroying our race. We're destroying the human race, in my opinion. And, it's really, really sad to watch, but people they just go along with it. Oh, there's nothing to see here. Oh, well, we won't talk about that. And it's demonic, in my opinion, what we're seeing, and it's really sad. And again, they're looking and targeting the children, and that's what makes it really, really bad.
Yeah, that's where it hits really close to home. I have to say, one of the reasons I got into all of this was the children. When I stamped visas at the Austrian embassies in Kuwait and Libya, I saw child marriage. I would see 50-year-olds marrying 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds. And I was always wondering where this came from. And of course, again, God was looking over me because I didn't ask those questions when I was there. Only later on did I realize that Muhammad married a 6-year-old and consummated the marriage when she was 9 and he was 56. And that is actually the question that got me in trouble in the first place. Because I asked a rhetorical question. Mind you, I never said Muhammad was a pedophile because that's against the law in Austria. That's already been adjudicated, as crazy as it is. I never said that. I said, we have to be careful with words. If we can't name a problem, we can't solve it. So I said, what do we call it if not pedophilia? And the judge, of course, she misunderstood me. And she did that on purpose. She had an agenda. And she accused me of calling Muhammad a pedophile, which I never did. You see the difference? Of course, you can look at it, listen to the question again. What do we call the behavior of Muhammad, i.e., marrying a 6-year-old and consummating the marriage when she was 9, if we can't call it pedophilia?
What do you call it then? What do you call it then? What did they tell you to call it?
Look, this happened in 2010. To this day, I have no answer. What can we call it? I don't know. I'm physically in the United States right now, but even if I said something and somebody watched this from Europe, I could get in trouble again. So I will not answer the question. I will not answer the question. And to this day, I do not have an answer. Nobody has ever told me, what do we call this behavior if we can't call it pedophilia? So, I don't want to get in trouble again. I think I've made my point, and people can do their own thinking, but I still don't know what it is. What do we call it?
Wow.
I just want to say that what you're talking about, everyone who's hearing this needs to really think about that. I mean, that's some intense, are we sitting back as the body of Christ, my brothers and sisters, are we sitting back and we're allowing pedophilia to happen all under the guise of this religion, way of life? It's more than just a religion, it's an ideology. But I mean,
it's a way of life.
They call it, it's a way of life.
They call themselves a way of life.
So
yeah, and
how do we respond to that?
Right. Go ahead.
No, I don't know how we're supposed to respond to that, because we've been told to sit up, shut up, and sit down, right? Because, whatever they're saying, it's religion. They're allowed to do whatever it is that they want to do, right? And I'm sitting here going, no, I don't think that's right. I love my Jewish brothers and sisters if they follow the Torah. If they follow the Talmud, right? Totally different story.
Right? I know. I agree with you. I don't again, I don't have an answer. I really don't. It's something I was told to shut up about, and I have to self-censor when I talk about it. So I'll have to leave this really leave this up to you. Remember, I am an Austrian. I have to self-censor. I cannot say whatever I want.
Wow. I will speak for you.
Thank
because
you.
I'm going to speak for I'm going to speak. Yeah, because in reality, what you're doing is you're speaking for the children. At the end of the day, you took your fight, right? Because you weren't able to say Muhammad is a pedophile and this is what he's doing, right? Whereas I can sit here and say, my Bible tells me, right, that when the Quran and the Talmud or I should say the Talmud says that you can have sexual relations with a child, I'm sorry, I have to stand in the gap. That's my responsibility. Every single woman that loves children has to stand in the gap. Society's come after the men, taking men out of the homes, right? And now they're coming after the women, all the trans stuff that's happening. Trump was on stage yesterday saying, oh, there's only 2 genders, male and female. Are you kidding me? The president of the United States needs to get on and talk to everybody and go, we're going to have 2 genders. Was that not just a given? Do we really have to be talking about that in 2025?
We do have to talk about it because it wasn't stopped back when I started speaking about it. It's really, it just boils down to that. If we allow things to happen, that's exactly where we end up. That is the problem. We didn't stop it back when I nobody came out and defended me in Europe. Nobody. So if nobody defended me, well, I guess then it's okay. And let me just back up a little bit also with the problem with Muhammad marrying his 6-year-old child bride. Look, if this was, if this happened, I don't know, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, we would not, we would say today, okay, it happened 3,000 years ago. Times were different back then. Excuse me. Times were different back then. But things are different now. It doesn't make it right. However, the problem here with Islamic theology is that Muhammad is considered by Allah and fellow Muslims as the perfect example for all mankind. And then you can look it up, Quran 33:21, if I'm not mistaken. You can look it up. You have in Muhammad the best example for all mankind. So Muhammad is supposed to be emulated by every single Muslim man on this planet. His actions, whether it be with his wives, his sexual relations, whether it be which foot he used to get out of bed, and I'm not kidding you, whether it be, how he cleaned himself after he used the restroom, whatever the restroom was back then, it is completely regulated. You will find this not in the Quran, but in the Hadith. So Islam is not just the Quran. You cannot understand and practice Islam without the Hadith. The Quran does not tell a Muslim how to be a Muslim. You need the Hadith. And without those Hadith, which are the sayings and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, you cannot practice Islam. You understand? That is the problem here. So because he is the messenger of Allah, and he is to be emulated by every single practicing Muslim worldwide, I mean, in this case, Muslim men, when it comes to, young girls, that becomes a problem. Because you don't know, our Western-oriented Judeo-Christian societies, or godless societies in the meantime, we don't know how to deal with that. How does a society in Europe deal with a devout Muslim who believes in his heart that it is his absolute duty to be a good Muslim to marry a 6-year-old? How do you deal with that as a society? We do not have an answer to that. Our societies are submitting, every single one of them. I don't see the United States really touching that subject either. Where actually the United States is just kind of brushing it aside, hoping it will go away.
So why do you think, Elisabeth, that U.S. governments are unwilling to acknowledge these facts, like what we're talking about, child brides and so on?
They're not listening. There are people out there who know what they're talking about. My good friend, Major Stephen Coughlin, for instance, he has written his entire thesis at military college, as well as I think a 600-page book, which I highly recommend, about this. And nobody wants to read it. Nobody wants to know. He was actually told to leave. He was banned from the White House. The book was banned. So, there's also a duty of our leaders to read and understand, and not just listen to, there's so many out there telling you, oh, Islam is not a big deal. It's just a beautiful religion. It's a religion just like any other. It's like Christianity, it's like Judaism. No, it's not. It's completely different. It is a way of life. And Islam is really black and white. But if you warp your head around that, it's also not black and white. It's a lot of gray. So it is a completely different system, ideology. There are some people out there who would argue that it's an ideology rather than a religion, or a religion trying to maybe cheat us into believing that it's a religion, and therefore hiding under the guise of freedom of religion. Again, I'm not making these statements. I am just throwing these statements out there for others to look at. Western civilization, Western leaders have not done their due diligence, and our children are paying for that. Just just look at, just a number, just a random number, 70% of all children in primary school in the city of Vienna do not speak German at home. Wow. So if you think that we're going to be able to stop this anytime soon, you're just mistaken. 70% of all children in primary school in Vienna do not speak German at home. I mean, just that number alone tells you that we've probably already lost our civilization, because math is math, and 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. So the question is, I warned back in 2009 and 10 when I was giving my seminars that we have to act now in order for us to be able to deal with this problem. I was silenced. And look at us now, we're 2025, and the problem is here. It's not gone away. It's gotten worse. And I can tell you right now, we're not going to be able to solve the problem without a lot of bloodshed. Back in 2010, we could have avoided bloodshed. But now, the tipping point is already, far gone. And there's no way for us to really salvage all of this.
Yeah. Wow. Just looking back from what you're saying, from when you were out here trying to warn people, trying to say, look, this has happened to our country. This is what's happening. This is what's coming to America. But nobody was listening. Nobody was, nobody was listening. So I want to ask you, in reference to your country, as you were seeing these things, these changes happening in your community, and what is it like now? Because what is it like now in your country with the Muslims and all of these things? What is it?
Well, it's worse than anything I've ever seen. We just recently had another terror attack in the southernmost city in Austria, about 45 minutes from where I currently live, and it's the usual. You have all the politicians congregating and saying, never again, we must do everything to stop this, and we're going to stop Muslim immigration, and it's all talk and no walk. I always, it always cracks me up when they say that. You can actually have why don't you just save the travel expenses and just have a few puppets say these words and show up at these marches and candlelight vigils and teddy bear ceremonies. It just sickens me. It's not going to stop if they're unwilling to stop it. These politicians also have their own agenda, and you could go very far back into the 1920s, where a Austrian count by the name of Coudenhove-Kalergi wrote in a book or in a document that European civilization, or European population, has to be replaced by a different population. It's all there. It's not a surprise. If we had people from Austria listening, or politicians from Austria, or elites from Austria listening to us right now, they'd probably say, oh, she's spreading, propaganda and fear mongering. Well, Coudenhove-Kalergi, the count, his work is actually out there. You just have to read it. So, if you feign, or if you accuse me of fear mongering, you better accuse Count Coudenhove-Kalergi of fear mongering, because that's exactly what's happening right now. But it doesn't really help us looking backwards to 100 years ago. We have to deal with the problem right now, and nobody's willing to do that. And that's what's actually happening.
Can I ask also, Elisabeth, we're dealing with our own crisis, as you know, with our politicians here, and a lot of the transparency of these things is coming to light, as we are seeing now. Are you having the same kind of issues with your politicians there? Because they thrive on the problem. They want the problem to continue. They want more to come in, so that, because again, it reverts back to them because of their money. So is that what's happening there as well?
Yes, of course. I mean, that's what's happening. And of course, there's so many more problems. But the biggest problem is we don't have a Donald Trump. in office, and there's no one around who could take. There's no European Donald Trump anywhere. So, Europeans or sane Europeans are hoping that, his I'm looking for the
Influence?
word, but his being Donald Trump is going to his being Donald Trump is going to have an effect on Europe. I mean, it is already, because there's a certain there is a certain group of people waking up, hopefully. I think there is, but it's just a small group of people. The other people are just drowning in taxes and governments that they never elected, like, in Austria, in Germany. The situation in Europe is really dire, Yes, we have a Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is the daddy, and he is actually talking to the rebellious teenagers in Europe, but the teenagers aren't really listening, right? They're saying, oh, well, it's just daddy over there, who cares what he's saying, and, I'm still going to keep doing my thing. But the problem is it not maybe too late in Europe? Could that be the problem too? And also, remember one thing, the European population has no way of changing its destiny. The European countries have ceded sovereignty to the European Union Leviathan. We have no way of regaining that sovereignty anytime soon. So, the situation is very, very different from that of the United States. You've always had, even during the dark Biden-Harris years, you've always had the freedom to fight for freedom. You knew that in 4 years it would be over. You knew there was an end to Biden-Harris. We don't have that. We don't have an end point. Our nightmare is continuing. If you look at, for instance, the what's happening in Romania, I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on in Romania. Romania is on the brink of civil war. Romania had a presidential election late last year, and the candidate who won was actually a right-winger and someone who the European Union did not want to win. So the European Union decided, we're going to ask our friends in Romania, in the capital city of Bucharest, to annul the election based on, TikTok. It was actually Putin and a TikTok campaign that made the election illegal. It was illegal. It was election interference. See how pernicious this is? This is working. But the Romanian people are fighting back. You need to keep your eye on Romania, because that's where it's starting. Okay? You got the same thing happening, even more perniciously, in Poland, where Poland has a European Union lackey in power, trying to and successfully changing the constitution, illegally changing the constitution. I have a paper that I can send to you that you can look at. You might want to do a show on that, actually, how it's actually done to legally change a country to make it subservient to the European Union. And then, of course, you have Austria. Austria held its elections in September of 2024. And the leader of the Austrian Freedom Party won the election, but of course not a majority. It's not enough to win the election. You need a majority of 50+1. So we always need a government that is made up of more than one party. So it's usually two parties. But every other party said, we're not working with this party leader from the Freedom Party. We don't want the Freedom Party. So they are now together. We have a new government since yesterday. I think they were sworn in. Today's Wednesday. I think they were sworn in yesterday. And it's a pro-Ukraine Marxist government now. We have a Marxist as the number 2 in our government. Our number 3 is the foreign minister. And the first thing she did, she went to the European representative in Austria and basically kissed the Ukrainian flag. And that is what's happening. This is also taking place in Germany. Germany recently held its elections 10 days ago. The party that won is the Rhino Party. The Rhino Party said, we're not going to form a government with the number 2, which is the MAGA-aligned Alternative for Germany. We don't want to work with them. We're going to work with the hard left, which means the people are not getting what they voted for. The people want a conservative government, both in Germany and Austria. Neither country is getting or has gotten a conservative government. The people's wishes do not matter at all. And that's what's happening. You need to keep your eye on Europe. That's the playbook. That's how it's done. And that's why you guys are so lucky you have a 2-party system.
I've been telling people that we, the people of this country, need to be backing and supporting the people of other countries, because we understand that our government is corrupt, and we hope that other people in countries don't, think that we agree with what is happening, right? So, and just as much as we know that what's going on, the shenanigans that's going on in other countries, is not about the people. So, I want to see all the people, right, come together and be able to say, look what's going on over there in that country. Like in 2015-16, what happened with England coming out of the EU and with Brexit.
Yes.
I was so excited. I was like, I hope they get out of Brexit, because I knew, right? They were trying to do the Trans-Pacific Partnership here, right, across the United. Right. Yes. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, for those that don't know, was a treaty. That treaty usurped all other treaties. It usurped our Constitution and everything. We would have been in dire straits if that would have happened. It was one of the first things that Trump did when he got in 2016. He took us out of the Paris Accord. He took us out of the TPP. Thank God. But now we're looking, we need to be supporting our brothers and sisters across the pond and making sure that they're okay, because what's happening in Europe is coming to America. It's happening in America, right? They're just further along in the process. So they're seeing things that we haven't even really begun to see. We're seeing little niblets of it.
Julianna, let me add also, Brexit was an anomaly. Brexit was not supposed to happen. But as a result of Brexit, of course, the European Union elites, the unelected bureaucrats, doubled down.
Yep.
So that's why you now see what's going on. The result is actually, Romania, Poland, the withholding of millions and billions of funds from Hungary. Just today, because Prime Minister Viktor Orban is siding, or is not siding with Ukraine, and is unwilling to provide more money and armament to Ukraine, the European Union is withholding even more money. You see?
Wow.
Now, that's not democratic at all. And the same thing, that's what the Austrian politicians are afraid of. If we're not lock a step with the European Union, they're going to withhold money to us as well. But the one person who probably could have stopped some of this madness, the leader of the Austrian Freedom Party, was not allowed to form a government. He tried to form a government, but he failed because the Rhino equivalent in Austria upped the ante so much that the leader of the Freedom Party had to say, look, it's not going to work between us. I mean, this is like the Cliff's Notes version of it right now. There's a lot more to it. But you see now, the party that won plurality does not get a seat at the government table. And it's against the wishes of the people. So this is something Americans need to educate themselves, in much more. There's so much more to it than President Trump saying, well, our new European NATO partners need to pay more. I understand all of that. I understand that. NATO countries have gotten a free ride for way too long. I have no beef in this because I'm not, Austria is not a part of NATO. Austria is a neutral country. We have absolutely nothing to do with NATO. Well, absolutely nothing is not true. We're part of the Partnership for Peace program within NATO. But, Europe is so much more than NATO. And that's something that President Trump and Vice President Vance, I think Vice President Vance more than Trump understands that, we are your European brothers and sisters. And people like me want peace. They want freedom.
Mhm.
They want freedom of speech. And
Mhm.
basically what they want and what we're thirsting for is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But we're getting none of the three right now. And that's why we are looking to Americans to support us.
So my question to you was, how does the Europeans view us Americans and what's happening here?
They hate you. They hate your guts.
Okay.
There's rampant anti-Americanism in Europe among the ordinary people, unfortunately. I would say the number is very high. I don't know exactly the number, but I would say just, ballpoint figure, probably 80+% of the European people have been gaslighted and propagandized into believing that everything about America is bad. Trump, of course, is bad. Freedom is bad. And of course, look at the children being brainwashed in school. I'm lucky, or let's put it that way. My daughter is lucky because she has a mother who was schooled in the United States, and she understands the Constitution. She understands that there's no such thing as a free lunch. That's one of the first things I taught my daughter. She could hardly speak, and I explained to her that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So it pains me to say that most Europeans hate America, and maybe not American people, but they hate the idea of America. They hate Trump. They hate Vance. Even my sister, who grew up in the United States alongside me, and she's only 2 years younger than me, she hated Vance's speech. Why? She couldn't tell me. She couldn't tell me. So don't think that that Europeans are waiting for you. When I talk about America to Europeans before I, travel to the US, I draw a lot of blank faces, as in, why are you even going there? As long as, you're not going to Disney World, you're not going to New York, you're not going to Los Angeles to walk, the Walk of Fame. So what are you doing over there? Okay. No, they don't understand. They don't understand. We have to reteach Europeans what it means to be free. They have no clue. I'm sorry to say, I know it's blowing your mind, but there's a huge disconnect. Europeans really do not like America.
Wow. Elisabeth, this has been amazing. Go ahead.
I'm sorry I don't have better news, but I mean, at least the person talking to you loves America, because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here and talking to you. Otherwise I wouldn't be traveling to the United States twice a year on my own dime, trying to talk to as many Americans as possible, trying to do as many interviews like with you two lovely ladies. I could be sitting at home reading Danielle Steele novels.
They're good. I haven't read one in a long time, but
I know. Wow. I haven't read one in a long time either, but I don't have the time. I have to liaise between Americans and Europeans.
Wow, man. Well, God bless you, Elisabeth, for the work that you're doing and trying to wake us up to what could possibly be coming on our own shores. Now, you tried to warn us before with, like the pronouns and the transgender stuff and all of that stuff. You were trying to warn us then, but nobody listened. And so what do you think is coming up next? What do we really need to be looking at next in America? Just what we're talking about right now, freedom of speech, what's happening in the government, how, rhinos and so on are taking over, and there's no clear pathway to freedom. Is that what we're looking at now for the future?
Again, remember one thing: you still have the Constitution, you still have the Bill of Rights, you still have the freedom, still there. But even more so, you need to protect it every single day. So that's what you need to do. Don't become complacent. Don't think just because President Trump won that you can just, now everything's done. You don't have to worry about it. Election integrity. For me as an Austrian, for me as a European, it's baffling to see how a country like the United States, one of the oldest democracies, republics in the world, with such a great document such as the Constitution, which is, in my opinion, the greatest political document ever written, cannot hold elections. In Europe, with all our shortcomings, with all the bad things happening over there, we can hold elections. I do not dispute the elections that are happening in Europe. I don't think for a moment that the election in September of 2024 was stolen in Austria. It wasn't. You don't have to steal an election in Europe. You don't have to, because you have to have majority in order to rule a country, which you're not going to get. So it doesn't matter if the freedom-loving parties win a plurality, as long as the other parties are all together. So what you guys need to do is you really need to get going with election integrity. The midterms are just around the corner. That's going to be your job, because the Democrats are going to buckle down, and they're going to buckle up and look to cheat in 2026. And it's up to you to stop that. And of course, follow the Constitution, teach the Constitution. You've got to have, you have to know it and teach it to everyone, not just the children, but everyone in this country needs to know what the Constitution says, because it's the law of the land. Yeah. And you need an Austrian to tell you that, which is pretty, you feel it.
Sad. Yeah. Sad. It's very sad.
But I'm going to continue doing that. I've made it my mission. Yep. I will continue doing that. And if I can do, if I can just do my part, hopefully that will allow people to realize the importance of this Constitution. Because let me tell you something. I want a First Amendment in Europe. One of these years, I would like one. We don't have it. They're not giving it to us for good reason. And, another final thought, please, don't forget about us in Europe. Yes, a lot of Europeans hate you, but they don't really hate you. They hate you because they've been gaslighted and propagandized. Okay? Don't give up on us just because these people, most of them don't know any better. Okay?
Wow.
It's really all pervasive, and the gaslighting and the propaganda. So forgive us for that and keep on going. You've saved our behinds so many times. You're going to have to do it again.
Wow.
Just hearing what you just said, what it really made me think about is, like in the Black community, like the Democrats here, like it's the same thing. They've just been so gaslighted by all of this, and they hate we the conservatives. They hate Republicans. They hate. Yes. I mean, just look at just bringing up last night and what we saw in the chambers there. Like, you see the hate from the other side, and it's like, it's unbelievable. And when normal people are out here looking at this, I mean, I just don't get it. Like, the hate that these people are spewing, but that's what's happened. Like, that's what they're putting on to people. And they are saying, you know what? We don't want to vote Republican. We don't want to vote conservative. Because y'all hate us. And that's how they see it,
Yeah. And it's not true, because I watched the entire speech, of course. But there was no hatred coming from President Trump. On the contrary, I thought his speech was full of love.
Yeah. So you were a CPAC. I know that we're at an hour, and I know that you're not feeling so well, but I totally forgot to ask you about CPAC. I'm so sorry.
At some point, I think my light is going to disappear on us. So, if it does, see,
there it goes. It's okay. You're good.
So the lights gone out, so that should already tell you. But I can give you like a Cliff's Notes version of what happened at CPAC.
Yes.
I have a few notes here. So the first thing is CPAC radiated a huge sense of excitement, especially with speakers, excitement and hope. I felt so hopeful. I listened to Elise Stefanik. I listened to Pam Bondi, Elon Musk. I loved Argentinian President Javier Milei's speech. And of course, one of the highlights, or probably the highlight, was President Donald Trump himself. And he actually stuck to 1 hour and 10 minutes as opposed to 2.5 hours last year. So that was nice.
Wow.
the contrast between Europe, the general sentiments in Europe is, CPAC was triumphant, and at the same time contrast that with Europe, where we are grappling with economic difficulties, tightening censorship, and rising inflation. And there's just such a stark mood difference that I felt when I was there. I did tell, my husband and others in Europe that you don't notice that when you're over there. It was only me coming over now that you see, that the contrast couldn't be bigger, couldn't be starker, actually. What else? What was interesting also, there was a huge presence of members of the European Parliament. I got to attend some of the meetings. These members of the European Parliament underscored the interest in strengthening transatlantic cooperation. So there is, it's still there, it's not all gone. Conservative members of the European Parliament do understand that we need to cooperate, the United States and Europe. These attendees at the meetings that I was able to attend questioned Europe's declining birth rates and the reliance on immigration, and they interpret this, and I agree, as a sign of diminished cultural self-belief. Because Saint Augustine said that a common love creates creates culture, and Europe's weakened identity is now a problem because Europeans no longer make babies. Why should they? National sovereignty versus EU centralization. I mentioned before that in order to become a member state of the European Union, you have to give up your sovereignty, and that's what Austria did as well back in 1995. And that is really creating a lot of problems, because if you cede your sovereignty, you're no longer, boss in your own home. Right. And, Brussels, which is the European Union, is expanding power, and the top-down policies are leaving many Europeans disconnected. I can tell you that I really couldn't care less about what Brussels is doing. All I know is that anything coming from Brussels is something that I will not like. Nothing coming from Brussels is something that I agree with. And when you foster a disconnect between the elites and the people and the population, of course, there's a lot of room for resentment and radicalization.
Yeah.
So you have, if you look at the election results in Germany, 25% of young people from 16 to about 25 or 26 voted for the very left party, which is a Marxist communist party. 25% of the youth.
Wow.
That's a problem. Now, also think about what would have happened if Kamala had been voted into office. That's exactly the frustration that we in Europe feel every single day.
Yeah.
I explained to you that there is a complexity in the parliamentary system, that we, of course, are not a two-party system, but a multi-party system. So the plurality itself is not going to be enough. Winning an election is not enough. We have the disconnect between voters and the ruling coalitions. The coalition that was sworn in yesterday does not represent me in any way, shape, or form. And I have not been, my beliefs, my values have not been represented in any government for at least a decade now.
Wow.
Okay. I feel disenfranchised. Okay.
CPAC was very invigorating for you, huh?
Yes,
giving
extremely
you hope.
invigorating, because I was able to speak to Americans, but also to many members of the European Parliament that I had actually no contact with before. I also interviewed a few of these members of the European Parliament If you're interested, I can forward. These are very short clips, like 2-minute clips with these members of parliament. If you're interested and your viewers are interested, I can actually send them to you, and you can discuss that either with me or later on your own. So, I loved CPAC. I always enjoy going to CPAC, but this year, of course, was different because Trump was back in office, and I was able to make more connections due to the fact that there were more people listening to what I had to say. One thing is notable: there was the presence of media, a lot of alternative media, a lot of I would say most of the media are independent media, podcasters. So not a lot of legacy media. I would say Newsmax is notable, and of course Steve Bannon's War Room. But other than that, you don't really have the big media there anymore. It's all the podcasters.
Yay, podcasters!
Exactly. Yes. Well, you guys should go to CPAC. By the way, CPAC will be in Dallas, Texas next year.
Excellent.
So the venue is changing, and it's at the end of March next year. I'm sorry,
Awesome.
2026.
Next year?
Okay.
And I heard a rumor that in 27 it will be here in Orlando.
Oh!
Yep.
Ooh. Okay.
Yep.
Hopefully that rumor is true.
Yes, I heard it from a good source, so it looks like it. So anyway, I think the more the merrier at CPAC. I do understand that Charlie Kirk's AmFest is a huge deal, but that of course is for the young people. For middle-aged people, forgive me for saying that, like us. Maybe CPAC has its place, and I think it as I think it should.
Yeah.
But I think it's also up to us to make it a good conference.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yes. So
as we land CPAC story.
Yes.
Awesome. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us and sharing everything that you have.
You're very welcome.
I'm Julianna Ormond with Watchmen Action. If you guys can please like and share, that'd be fantastic. Amania, I'll throw it to you next.
Okay, well, thank you all very much for joining us. Elisabeth, this was great. Thank you so much. You're packed full of knowledge and information, and I wish we could do it again. Maybe we'll do it again.
Will.
Because there's
we
so
will,
much
Amania and Julianna.
We
will.
So
That's
much
a promise.
There.
It's a promise.
Well, thank you.
Good.
So I'm so glad that you enjoyed CPAC. That's always a great experience, and I hope your sources are right and that it'll be coming to our house in 27. That would be great. So, friends, Amania Saluste here, the conservative poet. Thank you so much for coming by. Please go to the OrlandoPatriot.com to support. Do whatever you can. Really do appreciate that. And Julianna, will you show us the book from our dear friend Elisabeth? So that way people can see it. You can find it on Amazon. Anything you want to say?
Or you can go on it? You can go to my website, truthwasmycrime.com, to purchase the book.
Okay. All right.
Fantastic.
Well, follow us on socials, you guys. Facebook, Twitter, we're there. We've got to take the fight there. That's where it is. So let's do it there on the battlefield in Twitterville.
Exactly. And also follow me on X, ESW_real, REAL. ESW _REAL. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Julianna. Anything? That's it?
That's it. Love you, Amania. Thank you so much, Elisabeth.